Daily Detroit is brought to you in large part by our members at patreon.com/Daily Detroit. Get swag, access to our member-only Discord chat, and know that you're supporting local media. After all, local media cannot survive without local support. So join us at patreon.com/Daily Detroit. Hello, everyone, and welcome to your Daily Detroit, sharing what to know and where to go in Southeast Michigan. It is Monday, September 23rd, 2024. I am Jer Stays, and joining me as he does every Monday up to the election to talk about all these things that are happening in politics, Steve Freese. He is a freelance journalist for the New York Times, Newsweek, and many others. And he also writes the weekly newsletter for the Ann Arbor Observer. I'll put links in the show notes. You can check it all out. Steve, welcome back. Good to talk to you, man.
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing good. This thing just keeps marching along, whether it's national, local, or hyper local. It seems like there's never a dry time of things to talk about.
Is it me, or is this a new thing to be aware of exactly the number of days until an election? I mean, I guess I remember this a little bit over the last couple of cycles, but I don't know. I don't remember us going on every day with, well, there are 39 days left until Is it me, or has it always been that way and I just didn't know?
I feel like this feels new for two reasons. I think it's because of two reasons. One, you have a bookend of a much shorter time period with the addition of Vice President Harris into the race. You know, the candidate switch moved this from a snooze to something that people paid attention to. Like, some people paid attention to it, but the whole dynamic of everything changed with Harris. And then locally here in Michigan, you also have this thing where this week absentee ballots are going out. People are starting to vote a lot earlier. So all of a sudden the clock matters even more, and the clock's even sometimes shorter for some people than one would expect, because there's going to be a lot more, early voting, absentee ballots, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's fair. It's about time, really, that everybody start to become much more aware that voting starts as early as late September and is really in high gear in October. I mean, this is one of the reasons why debates in the middle of October seem old school. Like, we used to do it. And, there might be something, there's still discussion about whether Trump and Harris will meet again or if they'll just do back-to-back 60-minute interviews. That's the latest conversation I've read.
Well, Harris accepted the invite from CNN, but Trump declined it, saying that it is too late.
What that means is that she's accepted the opportunity to have an hour to herself on CNN, and why not?
Yeah, why not take that hour? I mean, she's been doing those kind of appearances. I actually watched a good chunk of her thing with Oprah Winfrey, and it was very personality driven. And the big quote that came out of it that didn't surprise me, but seemed to surprise the people online, was that, that she was a gun owner, and she'd shoot somebody if somebody broke into her house. And I feel like, there's a lot of people who would feel that way. I don't know. I feel like she did pretty well in that whole thing, communicating who she was, which I think ties into some of the data that I want to talk about in a second.
I did not get to see it. We were at Disney on Ice, and I did not get to see it, and I didn't go back and watch the stream of it. I thought it would be more interesting, actually, just to sort of see what percolates up to me as a non-viewer. And really, the only thing that did was that line about the guns. There was other bits and pieces in there. I guess there were a lot of celebrities that kind of popped on the Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
I guess, as it turned out, it was in Farmington Hills.
Yeah, I don't remember the name, but I think there's a product. I think, like, in the back of my brain, I feel like I've been at that location they've been at before, but I don't remember exactly what the name was, because there's some production facilities out there. It was an interesting way that they did it, but I mean, it didn't really break news. But I don't think she's really trying to break news. I think she's trying to just get people to know her. And with that, at least according to a Quinnipiac poll this week, in Michigan, and I know we don't follow the national stuff as much, but in Michigan, she now has the support of 50% of voters, Trump 45%, and, well, Jill Stein, who will never go away, 2%. Trump was strongest on the economy, but by only 2 points. And the analyst over at Quinnipiac, Tim Malloy, I want to get your reaction to this. said that 3 crucial swing states wave a red flag at the Trump campaign. The GOP's most go-to attack strategies against Democrats on immigration and the economy may be losing momentum. Likely voters now see little daylight in most cases between Harris and Trump on who can best handle those key issues.
Well, that's encouraging for the Democrats. I don't know. It's another set of polls. There's a whole bunch of them that seem to show her a bit ahead of him in Michigan and actually in all of the blue wall states, Pennsylvania and Wisconsin as well. And it seems to be that her numbers are ticking up a little bit. I don't know. I have the same problems I've always had, going into the 2020 election. The polls had Joe Biden up by like 5 or 6 points in Wisconsin, and he won by, I don't know, 2 neighborhoods in Racine. I'm not really sure, but I don't really know. I always feel a little bit flummoxed. I try really hard not to buy into too much of it. I watch people in the media on TV and in various popular podcasts who talk about these movements as if they're of some statistical significance. It's hard to know. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. We won't know until it's over, I guess.
Yeah.
It's a lame way to put it. I know people want to hear what the outcome is, but the pollsters don't know and the candidates don't know. And so certainly you and I are not going to know.
Yeah. And it's interesting to see how many ways they've broken down these polls, not just on issues, but the NBC News national poll that came out talked about how she had the biggest positive swing in positive perception since George W. Bush after September 11 attacks, just because she was so low before and then she just popped up. So it seems like some of her stuff might be working. But again, it seems like every single week there's a new way to cut a new poll with a new question, because it feels like everybody's trying to get like the hottest answer for that, because, I mean, there's a demand for that from some people,
Well, that's what we talked about last week. It's the scorecard. If you're looking to distract yourself with some good sports that are actually where the score actually reflects something and you can actually see something happening, start watching the Detroit Lions. I'm sorry. Sure, you can watch the Lions too, but the Detroit Tigers are on fire and it's very enjoyable. And by the way, as a New York Mets fan, we're doing pretty well too. Both my teams this year had terrible years and are now possibly going to the playoffs. And it's a great distraction if you really need one from all of this election.
Total sidebar, 15, 20 seconds, whatever. Total sidebar. I'm curious. I know you have connections to Vegas and connections to Michigan. How did you become a Mets fan?
I grew up on Long Island.
Okay, I guess I didn't remember.
My father was a Brooklyn Dodgers fan whose heart was broken when they moved to LA and could never possibly root for the New York Yankees. And so that's how the Mets ended up with the fans they have. So I grew up on Long Island. My father took me to the Game 6 of the 1986 World Series. It was one of the greatest nights of my life. And really, since then, I haven't had very much to cheer about as a sports fan, other than the cheating Michigan Wolverines who won last year. So.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
Let's see how many people I can offend in one.
Look, you're not a Yankee. See, here in Detroit, at least you're not a Yankees fan. That's the thing. If you're a Mets fan, it's passable. And here's the other thing. You have the home card. If somebody has the home card, in my opinion, if that's where you're from, you always get a pass because that's where you're from, unless it's the Yankees and you pick the right New York team. So I always had wondered about that when the Dodgers left. I kind of assumed that, but I figured that most Brooklyn Dodgers fans eventually migrated over to the Mets.
Well, I mean, do you know why the New York Mets colors are blue and orange?
I have no idea, actually.
Huh. Okay. Well, the blue was Dodgers blue, and the orange was New York Giants orange.
Oh.
Who went to San Francisco.
I appreciate that bit of history. That's very cool. That's very cool.
Sorry, everybody.
As I said, not a Yankees fan. That's all good with me. Appearance tracker. Donald Trump will be back in the state Friday, Grand Rapids and Macomb Community College in the evening. And then you were sending a note to me that Adam Scott from Parks and Rec is coming to Ann Arbor tomorrow with Lieutenant Governor Garland Gilchrist. We're just going to keep seeing more and more of these folks. I know that there was a big ACLU bus tour. Norris Howard from the show actually went to it. We're going to have some audio with W. Kamau Bell, which will be great on the show later this week.
Hmm.
But yeah, there's just a flurry of activity if you want to be involved in political stuff.
I wonder what you think of that. I mean, not the flurry of activity, that's obvious. But the reason I threw the Adam Scott thing into the hopper was because you had written to me about, what was it, the cast of Sopranos or.
So, Steve, it was actually the cast of Scandal.
Oh, okay, sure. Okay. Anyway, the point is that between that and all of these celebrities that popped up on the Zoom call for the Kamala Oprah event, Jane Fonda was just chilling out in Ann Arbor last week.
Mm-hmm.
I find it very interesting. I'm curious what you think of all of this celebrity flooding the zone thing.
Look, it's been my experience over the last 20 plus years of covering Metro Detroit that we are goo goo for celebrities. We just love them when they're in town. I remember when Ryan Gosling basically camped out in Detroit at Cafe de Mongo's and anywhere else he could show up, and people were obsessed. Metro Detroit loves celebrities, in part because we don't necessarily, not too many of them are here. So when they show up, it's a big deal. I think in some ways it's probably more effective than a policy speech to people who are persuadable. And that's the question, right? The people who are persuadable, I think it's more effective. The people who are complaining the most are generally the people not that persuadable. Like Harris is taking some shots from friends of mine on the left who are like, well, there needs to be this and this and this. Well, at the end of the day, what are you going to do? You're either not going to vote or you're going to vote. Are you going to vote for Trump or you're not going to vote? Right? There's not a huge persuadable audience there. When you've got a bunch of and I don't mean this in a derogatory way, but like lower information voters who are showing up maybe just now, celebrities, I think, are going to matter and bring people out.
You think? I don't believe that Jane Fonda showing up in Ann Arbor does anything, or even Adam Scott per se. I don't believe that people change their vote based on what celebrities, with the exception of Taylor Swift, who different because she could be bringing a lot of people who would not have otherwise voted. That's a whole different sort of category of people into the fold. But I think it can be a nice sweetener for the volunteers. It could get people motivated to go out and knock doors for Kamala Harris because, they might be hanging out with a TV star while they're doing it. That kind of thing I can see.
I agree with you. If somebody's locked in for a vote, I don't think a celebrity is going to change their vote. I'm thinking somebody who's very much on the edges of things. Maybe they wouldn't even have voted at all. Right. I don't think anyone's changing their vote over a celebrity. I do agree with that one, with the exception of Taylor Swift. But again, that's the whole thing of bringing people to the party. It's great photo ops. It gets the press out, right? It gets people interested in these things.
That happens. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And a star shows up. The TV news is a very visual medium. And if you've got somebody the name people know, those cameras are going to show up reliably, as opposed to some state rep in the middle of Oakland County somewhere. And no offense to friends of the show, people I know who are state reps in the middle of Oakland County who I know listen, but like they're showing up for the cast of the TV show. You know what I mean? More reliably.
Yeah, sure.
There were a couple of endorsements. The Michigan Teamsters endorsed Harris, where the national organization is not endorsing anyone. I guess the head of the Teamsters tried to speak at both conventions, Steve.
Yeah, the Teamsters is an interesting case because their membership actually was really strongly pro-Trump. The national organization had this problem because they don't endorse Republicans. So instead, they decided rather than pissing everybody off to just not endorse. And then these various committees of local chapters have all, I guess, endorsed Kamala Harris. And I don't know how that works with their membership because you have to think that the members who wanted Trump are members of these state level groups. So I don't know. I don't really understand it. I think that the endorsement itself is not very interesting. The data behind the 60-40 split of pro-Trump Teamsters members, I thought was a wake-up call, was actual data, which is different than a lot of these polls that we see. And that's fascinating in its own way. I mean, particularly since Trump was just on the Twitter spaces or the X spaces with Elon Musk laughing about the idea that if somebody goes on strike, they can be fired and replaced. He was very callous about the very fundamentals of striking and collective bargaining. So I find it hard to understand how any union member who feels strongly about union rights could be so in favor of Trump, except that the funny thing about the Trump people is that they are the ones who least believe anything that Donald Trump says. I mean, when Donald Trump says terrible things about different groups and so on, the different groups feel aggrieved by it, and the people who support those groups feel aggrieved by it, and they point to things like the Project 2025 and other things that he has said to say this is what he says he's going to do. And if it's really, really bad, the people who support Trump just say, oh, he doesn't mean it. It's the strangest thing.
Yeah. Down in the U.S. Senate race, Fox News reported that the Michigan Farm Bureau's Agri-PAC endorsed former Rep. Mike Rogers, the Republican. Now, they've been backing Debbie Stabenow since 2006. You know, sometimes us Metro Detroiters, I know I do, sometimes forget about how important agriculture is in Michigan, how big of an industry it is. People think about cars a lot, but agriculture is also a big issue when it comes to the federal government and Michigan lawmakers, and having a seat at the table is very important. Fox said that it could upend the race. I'm a bit skeptical of that take, Steve, to say the least. What do you think?
Nothing upends any race unless perhaps we find out that Alyssa Slotkin is hanging out on porn message boards talking about being a Nazi. If that happens,
you mean somebody running in North Carolina?
Yeah. So if something crazy happened, there would be an upending. Otherwise, this is a battle of inches. This is a grind until it's over. Let me tell you this. The Farm Bureau's endorsement is not gonna tip this Senate race. That's just absurd. I am seeing more Mike Rogers stuff in my mailbox. We'll see where the campaign goes and how well they do in terms of persuasion. I don't know what the background there is. Maybe somebody felt like Alyssa Slotkin didn't know enough about agricultural issues or didn't do enough about agricultural issues in the time she's been in the Congress. Or maybe Farm Bureau is nodding its head to the MAGA rural vote, which is reasonable. I mean, it's not unknown that the rural people are going to turn out for Donald Trump. Do you think it can, what do you say, upend?
That's what they said. I'm very skeptical of that, Steve. You know, the people who are going to give money were already going to give the money where they were going to give it. And the number of raw votes isn't very much. So I don't think, I feel like this race is a race where Slotkin has a bit more of a lead. And I believe, and we don't have new polling on this, but the last I look, she's outperforming the party.
Right.
So I feel like even if she's loses a little bit, whatever, I feel like a lot of the people who weren't going to vote for her weren't going to vote for her anyway, like in this group.
Right. The difference here is this. What you don't see is that I suspect that Alyssa Slotkin is out there in some of these rural areas just trying to narrow the margins, not trying to win some of these counties, but instead of losing them 70-30, if she loses them 60-40, and you do that all across those counties, then it adds up to a smaller deficit in those areas.
So Michigan Attorney General Dana Nessel and U.S. Representative Rashida Tlaib, well, they are, as on our internal Discord put it, they're having beef right now. They're not agreeing over a series of protesters that were arrested recently. There are a lot of barbs trading back and forth on it. The allegations, to me, in my opinion, don't seem to add up. Why don't we set the table for people a little bit on this? Because this was around some campus protesters that were arrested, right?
Yeah, they were arrested in the process of dismantling the encampment on the campus of the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor in, I think, May. And the story seems to be that some of these folks were pretty violent against the police. I mean, I haven't looked into all of the details of these charges. I'm going to assume for now that the Attorney General has her reasons or that there's evidence that supports these indictments. Otherwise, they wouldn't have gotten indictments. What Rashida Tlaib is saying is that usually these types of things are not prosecuted, and that there have been incidents involving the police that were not prosecuted in relation to Black Lives Matter and any number of other events. But here we are prosecuting a few of the folks that were not cooperative when the police were trying to take apart this encampment. So what's fascinating about it is this is a really left-wing congresswoman going after a very left-wing attorney general. They both are civil rights leaders in their own way. And it is surprising that this has blown up the way it has. I don't know what else to say about it. I think that, time will tell whether these charges hold up. I think that Rashid Tlaib is also glomming onto the fact that ultimately, after several years, I guess Dan Nessel has closed the book on the investigations in Flint over the water crisis. So there's a sense that, she has not been as aggressive towards the folks that may have exploited people of color.
It is interesting to watch in the context of this ongoing tension in the Democratic Party about the Muslim community, the Jewish community, all the things that are happening around that. I'd add to the pile the announcement from the mayor of Hamtramck, Amir Halab. He was elected as a Democrat. The government there has been putting in policies that some believe are anti-LGBTQ plus in recent years. I remember actually covering a protest around that. I believe it was last year. But the mayor of Hamtramck called President Trump a man of principles, and it's why he's endorsing him. And it is notable to see this area, some of these ongoing shifts and rifts, and it's a complicated issue to talk about, but it's something that I feel like is something worth addressing, because whether it's this cycle or future cycles, this is going to be something that impacts things going forward.
What's interesting to me about it is obviously there are different opinions within every community. There are loads of Jewish voters who are very upset about Biden's policy towards Gaza. And there are obviously many Muslims who are very upset about what's happening in the Middle East. But there are also local issues, and there are also the same kinds of concerns. If you're a religious conservative, the Democratic Party has always been an awkward place for you to be. I've often been surprised by how socially liberal in voting the Muslim communities have been. I've frequently have been amazed by how much some of the Arab American leaders stand up next to people like Bernie Sanders, who may agree with them on things going on in the Middle East, but in a lot of other ways is very different than them. The region has always had some of these fissures. The Chaldean Christians up in Sterling Heights that have fought against mosques going in up there. There are the Syrian community has often been more Republican and had some bigger Republican donors. This is another piece of that. It is interesting that a Democratic mayor is supporting the Republican nominee for president. We haven't seen that much of that this cycle. We've seen a lot more of the opposite. We've seen Republican mayors and other public figures who have supported Kamala Harris. So here's one for the Trump side, and it will be very interesting to see how they use it.
Are we going to see ads with him in it? I'm thinking about those kind of things. Is this something where here is a situation where we're going to use that to either use it as a wedge to get people to stay home or to maybe flip a few people? You make a really great point. And there are sections of any community, because no community is a monolith, but there are sections of the Muslim community that just are more conservative. It just is what it is in that regard. They don't believe many of the things that the Democratic Party believes. And as things change and people find voices, and you're going to see some shifts. And I don't think we really have any data around that yet either, which is going to be interesting to look at. And it will be interesting to see, does this card get played? Does he get deployed in some way, shape, or form? Was part of this endorsement, hey, you're going to go do some local commercials, or you're going to do something to help forward the campaign? It's going to be interesting to watch.
Yeah, I guess the upside for the Kamala Harris campaign is that the Trump people have not shown themselves to be particularly sophisticated about surgical approaches towards different interest groups. I could see how this endorsement could be useful to the Trump folks. I don't know that they are good enough at it to use it the way it needs to be used.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to touch on before we go is the Michigan Supreme Court races. You know, people get a little bit confused about this stuff because it's supposedly a nonpartisan thing, but the candidates' nominations are a political process. The candidates are decided at state party conventions by the party delegates. For context, Republicans back State Representative Andrew Fink and Circuit Court Judge Patrick William O'Grady. Democrats, current Justices Kyra Harris Bolden and Kimberly Ann Thomas. Currently, the court is 4-3 in favor of Democrats in this. Again, technically nonpartisan seat. You know, this is an important kind of down ballot race. I think deserves a bit of attention because a lot of things run through the state Supreme Court, and not everything's going to float up to the U.S. Supreme Court. Every single state House court matters, and our courts being elected in Michigan matters, and it not being as labeled or whatever. I think it's just something that's good to talk about and kind of highlight for people before we go.
There are absolutely significant issues that come before the state Supreme Court. The choice issue has been up there. There are other laws that the Democrats have been pushing through the legislature in Lansing that may need to be adjudicated if Trump wins. And there is an even more conservative federal Supreme Court. There could be quite a bit of confusion and clash between the state Supreme Courts and the federal government. So, yeah, I mean, people should be aware of these races, and it's not easy to know which people you should support depending on what your party affiliations are.
This is an interesting part of the ballot, and it's worth highlighting, especially for newer voters, because it's going to look a little bit different, and it's odd, and I don't understand why, and maybe it's something that I need to look into, but it is in the nonpartisan section of your ballot. There's going to be 2 races for Justice of the Supreme Court for, it doesn't say state Supreme Court, but Justice of the Supreme Court for the state. And one race will be Andrew Fink versus Kimberly Ann Thomas. Fink is the Republican nominated candidate. Kimberly Ann Thomas is the Democratic nominated candidate. And then there will be another race that is the current Justice of the Supreme Court, Kyra Harris Bolden, who is nominated by the Democrats, and Patrick William O'Grady, which is nominated by the Republicans. But it will not say Republican or Democrat next to them. And if you were to do something where you're quickly going through your ballot, you might be somebody who's straight ticket Democratic or Republican, but you still need to be specific in here. And it's a weird system that we have where we have some of these offices where people are nominated by the parties, but then it's nonpartisan. It's a weird thing, Steve.
Yeah, it could easily be overlooked. I'm often impressed that people sort these things out. But I mean, right now, we have a 4-3 Democratic majority in Michigan, and I would say that probably is a pretty good reflection of the state voting population. So somehow people get it and they respond. I mean, I assume there will be mailers and things like that to remind people or to alert them to these names that they should be paying attention to. So we'll see.
Always make sure, check your ballot, do your research before you do your thing, and of course, vote. Steve Freese, it is always good to talk with you. There will always be something interesting to get into. If you didn't know, Steve is a freelance journalist for the New York Times, Newsweek, many others, and writes the weekly newsletter for the Ann Arbor Observer. Always good to talk with you. Great to start the week.
You take care.
With that, I'm Jared Stays. Thank you so much for listening to your Daily Detroit. Do not forget to drop 5 stars on your favorite podcast app. Remember that you are somebody, and we will talk tomorrow.